Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this afternoon I'm delighted to be joined by James McKenzie, sitting in for JP Mason, who is otherwise engaged. James, welcome back. There's plenty to talk about over the last week. You've been writing a fair bit about it on the blog as well. Has the dust settled? Can we look ahead to Sunday yet? Is there still remnants of that humiliating and embarrassing defeat from Tuesday night?
Well, I'm sure you'll see from the talking points over the course of today's show that there is still a lot to talk about from that defeat on Tuesday evening. I've had the cold actually the last sort of week and a bit, and unsurprisingly watching your team lose 6-0 doesn't exactly help the flu one bit.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. And the thing is as well, right, we've obviously been talking about what Celtic can do better since Tuesday night, and obviously there's loads of different discussions to be had around things beyond Celtic's control. One being at this moment in time, the fact that, you know, we are part of a food chain and we're quite low down the bottom end of that due to where we play. We might be a very rich club, rich financially, rich in traditions and all that kind of stuff, James. But there is so much that we don't have control over at this moment in time. And we take all that on board. We're not expecting to be winning the Champions League and being in the latter stages of the Champions League. But on the other end of that scale, you're also not expected to be getting absolutely pummeled 6-0. And the point that I would make is if you come away from that and you have your best team and you know that there is no weak areas and you know there's been no missed opportunities to bring in better players within those areas, then you take it on the chin. You say, wow, that gap is huge and there's nothing we can do about it because we filled that gap. We filled that gap in the summer. Yet we still get absolutely hammered. But that's not the feeling I'm getting, because I just feel that we've gone into that match ill-prepared when it comes to personnel.
Yeah, I think the perfect example of that is you look at last season's Champions League group stage campaign. As much as Celtic finished bottom of the group and winless, there was still a relative bit of positivity around Celtic Park and around the supporters, because we felt that we'd gone into that Champions League campaign probably as best prepared as we possibly could have been. Ange had his strongest team with limited injuries. I think Cal McGregor picking up an injury about halfway through the campaign was the only real glaring absence from that campaign. So that's why there was a real bit of positivity around it. But you're seeing the fingers getting pointed in the same direction from all supporters after that game. But realistically, you shouldn't be having to go into a game at the Wanda Metropolitano against Atletico Madrid needing a result. The games against teams like Feyenoord and Lazio were the ones that you point at before the game, when the group is drawn, and you're thinking, this is where Celtic can pick up points. I can't fully paint the picture how big a missed opportunity that loss to Lazio was on match day 2. Mm-hmm. That was a must-win fixture. There's been 2 fixtures, Feyenoord away and Lazio at home, where you're thinking, we have to get something. We perhaps you would have been thinking we could have got a draw away at Feyenoord, but it was an experience that let us down. Then you look at that game against Lazio, we're arguably the better team on the night. If you watch the game back, we're arguably the better team out of the 2 sides, but it's a mistake right at the end that lets us down. And it's the same old story. It's the same story that we're banging on about for the last decade when you've been watching Celtic in Europe. And fingers from supporters have been pointed in the exact same direction as they were when we lost 7-1 to PSG, which was the last humbling I can really remember in Europe. And it's getting pointed at the Celtic board because, quite frankly, we weren't prepared enough. And when you're going into games like this without your strongest 11, without sort of real European caliber players that can make an impact. I remember I wrote a blog reflecting on the players we signed in the summer, and there was a point in the first few weeks of the season where some of these fringe players that we signed in the summer were starting to make a bit of an impact. But some of these players, they're ready domestically, but they're not ready for the European matches. And that's the line that Celtic need to find when they're buying players in the transfer window. Who's good enough domestically, and then who's going to be good enough to really make a dent against teams that are of a European calibre.
Yeah, and you know the other thing as well, I see the comment coming up regularly, buying a player at £8 to £10 million does not guarantee success. Buying any player doesn't guarantee success, absolutely. But if you buy 8 players who are not ready for your first team, and it's been proven by looking at the starting lineup, James, that the vast majority of the signings in the summer are not yet ready to step into a first team berth, then you're setting yourself up for the embarrassment. and the humiliation and the annihilation of Tuesday night. This is the issue. We're not doing everything as well as we could. And when you have so many non-contributing players, I'm always going to be of the view that if someone comes along and they look like a prospect, someone that you are able to develop, and I think Odin Holm is one of those players from the summer, then yeah, it's absolutely worthwhile bringing them in. Absolutely, 100%. But it needs to be a balance. And the balance of the scales have been too weighed on the prospects than the guys that are going to come in and make an impact. And I keep going on about it not just being the summer transfer window. I think it has extended beyond, I would possibly say, 3 transfer windows. And in that time, we've lost a lot of pivotal players, albeit we have brought in some players who have made a difference in the first team. But if you look at the last 3 transfer windows, the list is Jota, Moy and Starfelt, who are all obviously established first-team players when they leave. Moy, you cannot do anything about that. The guy's injured. Yakimakis, Juranovic, Nir Beaton and Tommy Rogic. These guys, that's a lot of experience, a lot of quality. And I would ask you the question in the comment section, how many players within that same period have we brought in that really are making an impact in the first team? And that, for me, is the big issue, because that's over 3 transfer windows. Then we go into January, and you can't fix it in January, James. You just cannot fix everything that we're discussing right now in January. What you can start doing, though, is you can start getting some of the pieces in place. So there may be 2 moves that are going to improve your first team, and we need to do it incrementally. It needs to be over probably the next 3 transfer windows before we can see the real difference and the real improvement in this Brendan Rodgers side. Are you concerned that Brendan Rodgers is slightly concerned, James? Is it that he's looking at it and going, right, I wanted McGinn, I got my Lumbo. Are we back at that stage? Or do you think that Rodgers has been made promises and Celtic couldn't fulfil them in the summer transfer window, but Rodgers knows why and he's accepting those reasons? Where do you think he is with all this?
Well, I remember discussing this when Rodgers first returned to the club in the summer. I was thinking he wouldn't have come to Celtic without reassurances or promises over where things sort of started to go south the last time. The performances on the park were absolutely fantastic. It was his relationship with those in the back room that really started to deteriorate, and basically forced his hand, pushed him towards getting that move to Leicester. But as you said, January's not going to be the window to fix it. January's always been a real sort of stopgap window. It's oh no, both our right backs are injured, let's quickly get one on loan for 6 months to come in until the end of the season. You're never really going to get a real impact player in January, unless you can get some sort of surprise loanee who comes in, sets a world alight, and you can get him on a permanent deal or something like that. But there's positions in this Celtic team where you're looking at that you really think we can improve. And it's the positions we're talking about in the summer. Nothing's changed. There's no circumstances over this season that have developed, that have opened our eyes, where we've thought, well, we might actually need a new centre mid or something like that. We needed a new left back in the summer. We needed a new left back last summer. We needed a left back in the summer. We needed a goalie in the summer just gone by. We needed a goalie last summer as well. But Celtic haven't done it. And it really surprised me, especially when you look at some of the players that we've been linked with and the players that are on the market. I remember when we were linked with that Croatian keeper, Dominik Livakovic, that move really had me excited. £7 million for a player who I think, if I remember correctly, was up in the nominations for the Ballon d'Or. He was in the nominations list somewhere, so then we could have got him for £7 million. I think he went to Fenerbahce in the end, who aren't in the Champions League. We've got the lure of the Champions League. So I don't know why we haven't used that to try and lure someone like him in. But it's shown how much the team is standing still, that these positions have been glaringly obvious that we need a new signing there, and we haven't done it for the last 2 years. It's standing still.
We've been talking about these positions for as long almost as we've been talking about the potential of Mikey Johnston. Jungle Lion, I know you'll be in the city, I think, on Sunday to watch Celtic play Aberdeen. It's what Celtic do. Savaged in Europe, then back to winning in the league. The board love that. The board do love it. This is the thing. I keep going back to the Ian Bankier comments. There's a culture within that boardroom where it's just remain top dogs. We can turn over this amount every year. You know, this is what being successful is all about. Listen, there's maybe parts of the fan base who are quite happy with that. I don't think I'm in the minority to suggest that we have to have some kind of aspirations in Europe, and getting 6 games whereby you're being humbled like we did on Tuesday night. that's nothing to aspire to. Double Denim. Hey folks, hope everyone's well. Rough week, but time to back the boys on the pitch. Not much we can change personnel-wise until January anyway, so best to show the manager and the boys we're behind them. And then obviously there's the backdrop as well of the board versus the Green Brigade issue that's rumbling on. So, in terms of the atmosphere and everything else, that's being affected. Paddy Mitchell, please keep coming, bringing the comments in. It's always great to have you driving the conversation and the discussion as well. Time for us fans to let the board know we have had enough of this mediocrity in Europe. And Kevin Mullen, afternoon Acsom, deflated feeling the now. Let's face it, we need to be realistic at the moment. We're not anywhere near good enough for Champions League. Rodgers needs help in January and the summer. And as I said, James, it's not about going out and spending hundreds of millions of pounds, which doesn't guarantee you that you're going to get any further in Europe. It's about maximising what you're doing at the moment and ensuring that you're at your absolute strongest, which we haven't been time after time after time in Europe. And I think that and we will have a look at the performance itself, James, because yes, you've got all these underlying issues, some which we have control over, like recruitment and youth development and all these different things we can do better. But there's loads of other things that are beyond our control. But one thing that is within our grasp is to defend properly. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you're up against better class opposition, James, but don't header the ball like it's a lay-on to the edge of the box. We did that 4 times on Tuesday night. 4 times. You pointed out, the first goal was a comedy of errors. You could look at Hart for punching the initial cross. You can look at Johnston's defence when the throw-ins, and then it continues from there. McGregor's not blameless on Tuesday night. I thought McGregor was really poor. He's the captain. He's the guy so often that has grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck, pulled us over the line. I didn't see that. I just didn't see it on Tuesday night. So there are individual players who can do better, even though we're up against better opposition, James. Some of the mistakes were really frustrating because that we can avoid that. We can do so much better just with the individual errors, can't we?
Yeah, I think if you look at Cal McGregor's performance for the Scotland national team in the 2-0 win over Spain at Hampden Park, that is the best crop of Spanish footballers available on the planet plucked into a starting 11. And Cal McGregor was one of the best players in the park. I remember there's a moment, 89th minute of that game, he absolutely skins Pedri, Barcelona's best player, and then he rides a tackle from Gavi, another one of Barcelona's best players, out in the wide areas. You look at the play that played that day, and you look at the play that played against Atletico Madrid on Tuesday night, and it looks night and day. Mm-hmm. And I've been harking on about it a lot on the blog. It's a mentality issue. It's Celtic are the great white shark in the goldfish bowl when it comes to Scottish football, but we're just a goldfish in the Atlantic Ocean when it comes to the Champions League, where we can't compete with these big teams. And a 6-0 loss to Atletico Madrid isn't going to provide the wake-up call, because we've had multiple hammerings like this in Europe before, and there's been no real reaction. The only thing that is going to cause a reaction, at least in the transfer market, would be if something was to mess up defensively. Not defensively, domestically. Then there's nothing for the board to fall back on as an excuse. But what I don't get is why we can't transition this winning mentality that the team has in Scottish football. We've seen it time and time again, the amount of late goals we get, the amount of hammerings that we dish out domestically. Why can't the team seem to transition that to European football? As soon as we come up against these teams, we look nervous. We look like we're really respectful. We look like we're just happy to be there and take part. When in reality, the team should be thinking, we've earned this. Mm-hmm. We won the league over the course of however many months. We won that league title. We won this trophy to ensure that we qualify for this tournament. We deserve to be here. That should be the mentality that's getting instilled in the team, but they still just play like competition winners. And we just need the players to really rise to the occasion, much like we saw them in the home game against Atletico Madrid. We really took the game to them. But I think as much as you can point the blame at Maeda's red card 25 minutes in, it's not a good time to lose a man, especially when you're a goal down. But we weren't helping our case at all. As you mentioned, we were heading it back onto them time and time again. We weren't using any of the opportunities we had to break out and make something happen. I can't really recall a Celtic chance from that game. Nothing really stands out. That's because we kept allowing them to pin us back over and over and over and over again. And you're just inviting a team like Atletico Madrid with some of the dangerous attackers they have to really sort of put the game on us, and we couldn't handle it.
No, we couldn't. I mean, there's been loads of talk, obviously, about the legitimacy of the red card. We could talk all day about that. There's plenty of comment already been made around it. And yeah, it's hard enough with 11 men against this side. But I agree with you, James. I just don't think even with the 10 that we equipped ourselves well enough. And that's something that people are hacking back. But Rodgers is rubbish in Europe. Going back to a period in the his first instance at Celtic. But there was a period in between both spells at Celtic where he has continued to manage in Europe. And I think that he has learned lessons. And a lot of those lessons I thought were articulated in the first game against Atletico Madrid, where we were sensational in the first half. Absolutely brilliant in the first half. And then in the second half, I think we've seen a bit of tactical ability that Brendan has in his locker. And if we're talking about European progress over a number of seasons, I'm going to have to mention our previous manager. Probably Ange didn't, because at 2-1 up, Ange would have wanted a third. And, you might have ended up getting beat 3-2 or 4-3, and it would have been an amazing night in Europe, but you wouldn't have got a point. And I think that, Brendan Rodgers has come into a situation where there's been a bit of legacy business already ongoing. Players that are so far down the line are getting signed that he's not about to just chuck it all out and say to the recruitment team, let's tear it up and start again. Because you didn't have the time, James, to get the bodies in. And you're losing players. You've lost Moy to retirement. You're losing Starfelt. You're losing Jota. You know that you need bodies in. I just don't think he was as involved as he will be come January. He's spoken about, you asked him the question. You asked him a pertinent question in the first press conference about his European aspirations. And I don't think it was as black and white then as it has been since then, where he's been speaking about we need to be playing European football, post-Christmas. I think that's a given next season if you qualify because of the amount of games you're playing. But he was talking about this season and either qualifying or getting enough points on the board where you can compete in the Europa League post-Christmas. Now, I love optimism. I love keeping the faith. And I did see a tweet about, a set of results that actually would result in Celtic getting through in this Champions League and qualifying. And I think that you've got to focus on the final two games, and you've got to say, right, see all the wrongs of Tuesday night, let's put as many of them right as possible. Let's regain a bit of credibility, because you know what, James, people are lining up to tear Celtic to pieces and tear Scottish football to pieces, and we're not here to do that. We're here because we hate seeing Celtic get beat and well beat, and we would love to find a solution to it. We're trying to do all that in the knowledge of everything that holds Celtic back and Scottish football back. We're not stupid. We try to be as balanced as possible, but we can do better. This is my point. We can do better on Tuesday night. There's a goal, and I've seen it from another angle, where Joe Hart is standing 2 yards behind his own line. How is he going to stop it? Is it some kind of method that he uses to stop it? He wasn't stopping it. If he stopped it, he's behind the line. The defensive frailties, they seem to fall to pieces. Whereas, yeah, I get the fact that we're not under that kind of level of pressure domestically, James. Very rarely are we under that level of pressure from that level of quality domestically. So there's always going to be a step up. But we've shown that we can step up because we did it against Lazio. We did it against Atletico Madrid. You've got to write off Feyenoord because of what happened with the red cards. But we have done it twice this season, I believe. Very unlucky against Lazio. And we got the draw against Atletico Madrid. So it is something of a balance. And I don't want to just tear it all up and start again. But we need to start improving, starting with the recruitment in January. That needs to start improving. What do you think Rodgers does? Did he have 2 or 3 names on his own wish list that we didn't get over the line that we can revisit? What do you think he does in January?
Well, I remember, I can't remember which journalist it was that posted it. I think it was somewhere close to deadline day in the summer. It was either Anthony Joseph or Stephen McGowan. It was one of the two. They put out a list of positions that Celtic were after. And I remember there was a goalkeeper and a left back on there. I'm certain if I dip through the archives in the blog, I'll be able to find what the other positions listed were. But I don't think you replace a first-team player halfway through the season. I don't think you do that. The team's gelled. It could throw up so many different equations if you're to replace Joe Hart, especially with the standing that he has in the squad. He's one of the most well-liked players in the club. The influence that a player like Joe Hart has seen and done it all, an England number one, a Man City number one, the influence that he'll have on a dressing room, you can't really replace that halfway through a season. That could have catastrophic consequences, that's got to wait until the summer. So I'm not too sure what Brendan Rodgers does in the summer. I don't know if there's I think it'll just be a case of loan signings. I think it'll just be a case of padding out the bodies where we need them, perhaps a new winger or something like that. I'm not too sure. But when you're assessing the chances we have in the rest of this Champions League campaign, you made a good point that the performances haven't been bad so far. I think that Atletico Madrid match at the Wanda Metropolitano is probably the first bad performance of this Champions League group stage campaign. When I spoke to Callum McGregor after the home game against Atletico Madrid, he said that 2-2 draw was the best performance of the group stage campaign so far. And it's no secret, the last decade, you could probably go back even further than my lifetime, that Celtic have been underachieving in Europe. It's the amount of games that you're thinking, we should have won. We could have won that. We should have won that. There's so many games that you can go back to. It's an endless list over the last decade or so of opportunities that Celtic could have won, but we didn't. That's the bottom line. We didn't win. And it's always the fine margins that seem to cost Celtic, whether it's a defensive error, where it's, what if we scored that chance? Well, what if so-and-so never made that mistake? What if so-and-so never got sent off? And it's the same story that's repeating itself over and over every single year. And the problem's never addressed. There's never more quality brought into the team. And you just wonder when the wake-up call is going to be. I hope we see that reaction next summer. And I hope we start taking Europe seriously rather than just a place for financial gain. Because there's teams in similar situations to us. Take a Red Bull Salzburg, for example. They dominate domestically. They blow away every team in the Austrian Bundesliga. And they can still come in and give a good go in the Champions League. I don't really see them getting hammered about the place every single time they play. I think there's still plenty of our teams. Ajax are in a horrendous place right now. I think they're in the relegation zone. But if you look at it a few years ago, Ajax got to a Champions League semi-final. Fair enough, they had probably the closest thing they've had to a golden generation in about 20 years. But a team like Ajax and a team outside the European top 5 leagues with homegrown players got to a Champions League semi-final. Celtic should be looking to make as much progress in Europe as possible to get a bit more respect for the club in a European and a global standing. But right now, we're not doing that. If you're a team, if you're a fan of another team in that Champions League draw, I remember the UEFA put the tweet out, it's who do you want, what is your dream Champions League draw? And every single fan of every other team has Celtic as the team they want in pot 4. You can go, you can see a cool ground, you can get some photos, you can see your team win 3 or 4-0.
It's a bucket list away day. Yeah, absolutely. I get it. And it's horrible.
Like that.
No, you're right. It is. It's not where you want to be. You don't want to be that kind of token, let's go and visit them and enjoy the experience and come home with 3 points. I think what you need to do is look at last season and then say, right, any improvement on the points tally from last season will be an incremental improvement, even if we don't qualify, right? And I think that needs to be the focus for the next 2 games, James. We've got obviously the final game, Feyenoord at home, winnable. Listen, if you use the benchmark as Atletico Madrid at home, it's winnable. Lazio away, who knows what might happen, right? It could be one of those.
Lazio away, then you've got to take an account. On the wings, we will have Yang.
This is a big question, right? Who do we have? Are you saying Yang and Forrest?
I think it's going to be Yang and Forrest, unless Brendan has some complete tactical switch up where he goes Kyogo no up front. And I think, if I remember last season, did Ange not play Kyogo behind Giakoumakis for one? I think it might have been Shakhtar at home.
The night Giakoumakis scored. Yeah,
it was Shakhtar at home. They completely changed things up, so we could see a completely new roll the dice, or we could go Yang and Forrest to the wings. But either way, we're looking pretty depleted for that Lazio away game.
We might be forced, like you say, to change the shape of the side. You might actually see Kyogo playing on the wing. He played a lot of football on the wing prior to coming to Celtic. And if you speak to Liam Carrigan, he speaks about that, the fact that he's probably played more games through the middle for Celtic than at any other time in his career. These things will all be considered, might give O a chance of a start in the Champions League. But we've got to focus kind of short-term goals here to try and improve where we are in relation to this development of improvement. in the Champions League. So we look at where we were last season at the end of the campaign. How do we improve that? Well, we're going to have to get a couple of positive results in the last 2 games. And we're going to be doing it with one arm tied behind our back because we've got 2 of our wingers who are very effective out through suspension. Let us know in the comments section, who do you pick? James McKenzie reckons it will be Yang and Forrest. We might have to change the shape of the team, and perhaps even Kyogo might drift out wide. But that is one of the big dilemmas going into the Champions League game. I think certainly what will happen, James, is whatever we do leading up to that won't be with one eye on the game in terms of the personnel. So you go into the Aberdeen game, you pick the best team to beat Aberdeen on Sunday. And we'll be working through what that best team is, because going into the game on Tuesday night, I think the big question was around the midfielder. You wrote up quite a bit about that. Who takes Hatate's jersey? There were no complaints really when Bernardo was named. I certainly didn't see any in the comments section when Bernardo was named. And I think that the reason he was named is that he had a very specific role, which was mainly a defensive role. But you know that he can pull out a defence split and pass. He showed that even against Ross County. He can do that. But obviously, it didn't work out, and it wasn't Bernardo's fault or the inclusion of Bernardo that resulted in the terrible performance. But we do have a few questions to ask about Sunday's lineup. So let's start in the defence, James. Give me your back 5. I'm guessing we're going to stick to the normal shape that we've been implementing because, let's be honest, it is working generally. What's your back 5?
My back 5. There's got to be Hart and goals, obviously. Johnson right back. Carter Vickers and Scales will probably be your 2 centre backs. Greg Taylor left back. I think it picks itself at the moment. You can't really drop anyone. I don't see Mike Navrocki coming at the team at the moment. He will be in the team eventually. He will be our starter for Celtic by the end of the season. I'm going to make that point now. But who he replaces and when he comes in, I'm not too sure just yet, because whilst Liam Scales' form is still so high, and whilst it doesn't show any real signs of dropping, you can't put Liam Scales out of that team. But I think Mike Navrocki will be a starter for Celtic by the end of the season.
It's interesting that although he's back in training, James, he didn't make the bench. Lagerbielke did. Welsh did.
He's not in the squad. He's not in the squad.
Oh, good point. Yeah, because he got injured straight after, just before the squad was announced. Yeah, absolutely. So we might actually see him re-entering the squad for Aberdeen on Sunday, because it looks as though Lagerbielke's out of favour, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's completely AWOL. Where has he gone? He's not really put much of a foot wrong at Celtic, apart from that red card in the Champions League. I think domestically he's been pretty solid. It all seems a bit harsh, especially considering about 3-4 months ago he spent £3 million on him, and he's out of favour already. I'm not too sure how that looks. But one thing I was really happy to see, because I'm quite a big fan of Stephen Welsh. I was really happy to see Stephen Welsh back at the bench. I think he's got a part to play. He would have had a part to play at the start of the season if he didn't pick up that big injury. We're all talking about this is going to be a big moment for Stephen Welsh. He had a good pre-season, gets the new deal. Everything's pointing upwards, and then, boom, the injury happens. And where is he in the pecking order now? I'm not so sure. But I hope that Welsey's been out injured, because there's certain players in the Celtic team that attract criticism for no real reason. They get a lot of stick. I think David Turnbull's a victim of that, Anthony Ralston's a victim of that, and Stephen Welsh is a victim of that. They get a lot of criticism for it's a lot of the time it's not unwarranted, and I think Stephen Welsh comes under quite a lot of criticism for no real reason. But I'd like to see him prove himself this season.
I think at the beginning of the campaign, Stephen Welsh was ahead of Liam Scales in the pecking order, and then he gets the new deal, and that pretty much cemented that view. Liam Scales is in on merit, and like you say, maybe long term you bring in one of the most expensive players you brought in the summer, and that was always the idea, and that might be the long term solution to it. But as we sit here now, what Liam Scales at the very least has done, has put himself back into the frame of being part of the squad and an important member of the squad, very much like maybe Stephen Welsh and Tony Ralston. Who, yes, they do come under a bit of flack. That's another discussion. Why does it happen? Would it have happened if we bought them in? Probably not. I can see why some people look at let's say, James Forrest and say, oh, he doesn't contribute and all this, but he does. He came in at the weekend and scored a goal. He is going to contribute, just not 40, 50 games a season. But yes, I think that your back five is picking itself for a couple of reasons. And it's not because of form. I mean, if Greg Taylor's a couple of bad games, you can't really replace him. And I know that some people in the comments constantly say Liam Scales should play there. I disagree. I don't think you see the best of Liam Scales at left back.
That's where he struggled.
Yeah, that's where he did. He struggled, and that was where maybe we built a perception of the quality of Liam Scales because he was playing out of position. I remember in an early interview where fan media were present, he spoke about his best position, and it's the one that he's playing in right now. It's no coincidence.
All playing centre back.
Exactly, and he's putting in the performances, James. He's no perfect, but I'll tell you what, the form of Carter Vickers and Johnston's not been perfect either. So, you know, you're thinking, right, they're in there because we know what they can do, but they're not really doing it week in, week out right now. I need to see that type of player stepping up as well, because Johnston, we know the quality. He took to the Celtic side like a duck to water. He was unflustered for his first game against Rangers. He then, you know, you're asking this season, step up the Champions League. He's not a great season, though, James. And by the way, I'm not deliberately pinpointing individual players for criticism. We're sitting top of the league. We've got a 5-point gap. I'm quite happy domestically. I know that we got knocked out of the League Cup. That was one of those days at the office. And as Rodgers says, we're a different side now. There's certain players have settled into the squads. We've got others who were injured back into the team. So I'm quite happy domestically. I know the performances haven't always been there. The European exertions have affected that. I want to see better form from Carter Vickers and Johnston. Would you agree with that? I know you do the ratings after every game.
Well, it's interesting you touched on Alistair Johnston because I wrote on my player ratings. It was the first time he's looked out of his depth in a Celtic jersey. We've mentioned how every single big opportunity that's been thrown at him, every potential banana skin that's been thrown in his path, he's just kept going. Derby match on your debut, done like it's nothing. He's done the World Cup, he's done cup finals, and he's absolutely shone. And he's been brilliant. But I thought our main weakness on Tuesday night, the main point of attack for Atletico Madrid was the wide areas. Riquelme was absolutely roasting Johnston down that flank. And then you had Nahuel Molina absolutely rinsing Greg Taylor on the other side. It was every single time you saw the Atletico wide men running at the Celtic fullbacks, you knew they were going to get past them. You didn't have any real sort of hope. And I remember when in the Lazio game, Matthias Akanji gave Alistair Johnston a really tough time as well that game. He was really giving them the runaround. But then again, I thought Johnston was good against Feyenoord and Rotterdam, and I thought he was good in that Atletico Madrid game as well. So I don't really want to go in on him too much. I just wanted to mention that I didn't think he was at his best against Atletico Madrid, probably one of his weakest displays in a Celtic shirt. And I think Carter Vickers has been relatively solid. I wouldn't outline him as one of the worst players from Tuesday night. I think he made a really good goal-saving block. But then there's a couple of moments, for example, the ball does deflect off of him and takes out Joe Hart's path. It's the Lazio game that you're looking at from Carter Vickers as it comes on and he makes the mistake. But that is down to a lack of that sharpness. I think we're perhaps not seeing Carter Vickers being as good as we think he is because of how good Scales has been. I think Carter Vickers still had a solid enough season.
I'm going to ask you a question about Tuesday night, specifically around losing a player and being up against that quality of opposition away from home and already being a goal down, James. Do you think at that point or sooner than half-time, we should have made that difference, that change that we made at Celtic Park against the same opposition? Do you think we should have brought on another centre-half at that stage?
At that stage, well, hindsight's a magic thing. I think Atletico, they really started to pin us back at the end of the first half. You really felt that the goal was inevitable. So perhaps we probably should have made that substitution a bit sooner. Getting Nat Phillips on, someone who has the experience at this level. Well, I know people have sort of been picking me up on that, saying he's only played so-and-so amount of games. It's still so-and-so amount of games more than most of our team has. So I think you probably could have brought him on a bit sooner.
hindsight is a great thing, but all you need to do is have a look at the half-time bulletins if you want to hear if we were saying it or not against Atletico Madrid. You move into the midfield, and it's been an area that for many, many weeks has been kind of like self-sufficient, picking itself. And then Hatate gets that horrible injury, and Hatate's had such a difficult season this campaign under Brendan Rodgers, who is a manager that I felt would have really enhanced three players. I said it time and time again, didn't I, at the start of the season? O'Reilly, Hatate, Abada. And Hatate and Abada have had nightmares this season through injury. So we've not really seen the benefit of two of the three that I had mentioned. I probably was quite critical of Callum McGregor the other night, but obviously he's the captain. He plays against Aberdeen. Matt O'Reilly, I thought, had probably his least effective game against Atletico Madrid away. And I was surprised at that because I feel that, and we've spoken about O'Reilly coming up to every challenge, rising to every single challenge, James, coming from a third-tier club in England. All right, you're now a first-team player, and he rose to that occasion. He rose to the games against Rangers Cup finals, and he steps up in the Champions League. He's won Player of the Match last season on one occasion, and he done the same in the other fixture against Atletico Madrid in Glasgow. He was a big disappointment during the week. He comes back in against Aberdeen. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Who's the third midfielder? This is a discussion before every single game. I mean, is this a fluid thing, James, where depending on your opposition, that third midfielder could be defensive as it was on Tuesday, or it could be an attacking player like Turnbull for a game like Aberdeen on Sunday? What's your take on it?
Well, I think you need the reaction in the performance. I think I'm going to go back for the archives, one of my blogs, and see how Celtic reacted when we got hammered those other times. What was the response in the domestic game when we lost 7-0 to PSG? I'd love to go back and look at if someone in the comments can actually point that out for us. That would be pretty handy. But I think I had David Turnbull in my team predictions for Tuesday night's game. I still think he would have been a better option in that game than Paulo Bernardo. I think if Maeda doesn't get sent off and you've got someone like Turnbull there in the park, I think you needed players in the team that were going to take a chance. Someone that were going to maybe have a try from range, because chances away to Atletico Madrid are going to be extremely hard to come by. So someone who's got a bit of quality from range and can take a risk could have been extremely valuable to having that Celtic team, as well as someone who's good in the tight spaces when they're not afforded a lot of time on the ball, who can create a lot of chances. I think David Turnbull would have had a real impact on that game, much like he did in the two games last week. Ross County and St Mirren is much not to the level of Atletico Madrid, obviously not. They were still really compact, really organised, and really hard to break down. And David Turnbull was one of the only players in those games really getting in those spaces. He was involved in almost every chance we were creating. So I would have had him starting, and I would definitely have him starting against Aberdeen this weekend, alongside Callum McGregor and Matt O'Reilly.
Yeah, that's my middle three for sure. We're going to be talking about who plays up top, and I don't think we'll be picking the team, as I said, with one eye on Europe. So obviously Palma, Maeda, Kyogo. There's a few options. Yang as well. How does Brendan Rodgers play it at the weekend in your view? I mean, again, Palma, he's been really good since he signed, scoring some cracking goals. And you know what? At the beginning of the Atletico Madrid game, he looked up for it. He was striking the ball from distance. Faded badly, like many of our players. Got a booking for dissent, which is frustrating as hell when you consider that we really need him in the next game in Europe. How do you play at the weekend, though, James, against Aberdeen?
So I think there's two out of Palma's three bookings come for sort of stupid things. One for dissent, one for taking his top off for a goal that never counted. It all seems pretty brainless from Palma, but he's been brilliant to start his Celtic career, so I won't really hammer in on him there. I thought there wasn't really a good performer against Atletico Madrid on Tuesday night. There's no one that really comes out of that game with their head held high. I think the highest rating I gave out was a 5, and that was to Joe Hart, who conceded 6 goals. So you can't really praise too many of the players from that game. But if I'm looking at the front three for Aberdeen, I think it's got to be Palma, Kyogo, Maeda. That is our strongest front three we can field at the moment. I think Palma's only getting better domestically. You've got to have him in the team. Diaz and Maeda, you saw as soon as we lose them against Atletico Madrid, the team completely capitulates. We fall to pieces. That shows the importance that Maeda has to this Celtic team. So he's got to start And then Kyogo's the talisman. He's got to be in the team. Although I wouldn't be surprised if O got another opportunity.
Yeah, I know, because you ask yourself, when do you play him for more than 8 or 12 minutes? And a game against Aberdeen at the weekend may well be that opportunity to rest Kyogo. The Urban Culture, let's get some of your comments in. How do we deal with the loss of Palma and Maida in the next game against Lazio? And also, when you look at the last 3 windows, is my point going to stand? We've lost too much quality and not improved the squad with like-for-like quality. I don't mean spending the same level of money, but have we bought, when you're looking at right back, centre forward, centre halves, midfielders, wingers all being lost, have we bought enough quality to replace the guys that we've lost? And we have the Urban Culture. Welcome back to the show. The AGM is the opportunity to give them a warm reception, red hot. I sometimes wonder if they care about receptions or banners, or because they know, and it's been proven, that season on season we'll buy our season tickets, James. The 3-match package will come along. We'll buy that. And at the end of the season, we'll have a few trophies in the cabinet and loads of money in the bank, because that is generally what happens. And it's only when you start questioning the performance and the knock-on effect of that performance, which they've got to look at. It gets to the point that the carrot of the Champions League to players now, like even if you look at the situation we were in with Ange Postecoglou's specialist knowledge of the Japanese market, right? Celtic have got no exclusivity over that whatsoever. Everybody else is tapping into these markets. So you've got a carrot, which is, oh, by the way, I know we play in the Scottish League, and it's generally kind of viewed as being a bit of a backwater tin pot league by anyone who's not involved in it, and many who are. But what we can offer you is this. And then they've got a list as a football club. We can offer you this platform. We're a globally known football brand, never mind anything else, supported throughout the globe. But we're going to be playing Champions League football season after season. But it will get to the point where they're thinking, well, do I really want to be on the end of a 5-1 or a 7-1 or a 6-0? Do I really want to be on the end of that? Or do I sign for a kind of mediocre mid-table English team and hope that my performances there will get me a move to a bigger English team? So it does eventually affect you. You can't just keep thinking that carrot's always going to be there and that carrot's going to be the Champions League if we constantly get humiliated and fail to win games. Hazel F67, I'm left asking myself what Brendan Rodgers was promised to come back. Listen, we're reading between the lines, aren't we? If we say that certain promises were made, Brendan Rodgers has spoken about recruitment as being he is presented with players and he looks to develop them, James, his words. He has gone on to say that there were 2 or 3 that we couldn't get over the line before the transfer window slammed shut. Was one of them Matthias Kvitsgarden, who plays for Brøndby, the striker? Is he one of the guys that I think we maybe bid 3.5 for? But we'll be back in for him in January or perhaps in the summer. These are often the things that we find out after the event, isn't it? That we were in for A, B, and C, and we didn't quite get it over the line, and someone speaks to somebody in 10 years on a podcast and we get the truth. FS, either accept the status quo where we are top dog or agitate for boardroom ownership. Change. How do you do it, though? How do you do it, James? How do you rock that boat? How do you get the point across? Because we have got a very vocal group, for example, who agitate the board for other reasons, and they get banned. They just get kicked out. Far too influential. We can't have you agitating the board or agitating anything. Let's just remove you from the equation. It's very difficult to get the point across, isn't it? Is my point.
Well, I mentioned it earlier in the show. The only way you're going to get a real reaction with loads of money spent is if Celtic are hit domestically. Celtic, as much as they can fail in Europe, as much as they can get beat 6-0 every year, you can always fall back on, we are Glasgow Celtic, champions of Scotland, we're the best team in Scotland. But what happens when Celtic become the second best team in Scotland? Then the board will finally start to react. They'll finally think, oh, we're not Celtic, the champions of Scotland anymore. We're just Celtic. Then they have to bounce back. Then they have to go out and spend the money. They have to go out and get an Ange Postecoglou and give him 30 to 35 million pounds to spend on whoever he wants. That's when you get a real reaction. When something like that happens, when Celtic are really hit, where it hurts the board, when it hurts their pride, and that's when they're second best domestically. Yeah. So that's the only way to get a real reaction, I think.
Yeah, and then a statement is made, a big statement. And I remember the big statement being Martin O'Neill.
That's going to get a real reaction from the supporters as well, because we sort of have the same feelings. As much as we're annoyed at not advancing in Europe, as long as if we're going to win 2 trophies, if we're going to win the league by the end of the season, we're absolutely buzzing. The celebrations in the city.
Right,
so
great point.
It goes both ways as well.
Great point, right. So a Celtic State of Mind has been transmitting, broadcasting, podding, videoing, all this kind of stuff for 6.5 years. We started streaming 3.5 years ago on a daily basis. So you can actually gauge that mood that you're talking about, right? And the expectation, if you like, and then the momentum and everything builds, and you've got aspirations to improve in Europe. And then we get knocked out of Europe. And very quickly, and I said this to John Hughes the other day there, James, very quickly, the discussion, both within our wee hub of Acsom contributors, but the discussion within the comment section very quickly focuses on the domestic, right? And almost we park that European failure for another season, and we don't push it and we don't push it. So it does mask a million deficiencies, doesn't it? Domestic success. And yeah, as a fan base, I think you are guilty, because you obviously you then start buying into what's the next game. Or the next game's Aberdeen away, Aberdeen at home, Rangers away, whatever, and you focus on the domestic challenge that faces you next week. So I absolutely get that, and we're all guilty of it. And I think it takes probably influential groups to make a difference and to ensure that the voice is heard. Fans forums, how effective are they? Maybe if you are giving them feedback on trivial matters, then they are taken on board. The bigger matters, are they really taken on board? Not quite sure. And then you've got obviously the AGM, but things are vetted at these events as well, James. And, I do think that lording it up in Scotland really is the big key objective of this particular board. And moving beyond that, I don't think there's any ambition. It's so easy for them to say, it's impossible financially to compete at that level. We're just happy to be there. And that was the view of Ian Bankie. I'm going to keep going back to it because it was one man's voice, but it showed me what the culture was within the club at that time, what the view was, what the attitude was. And as fans, we're looking at that thinking that's completely off the scale compared to what we're talking about. Episode 1, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Episode 1, June 2017, I think it was. Kevin Graham and I speaking about European aspirations. 6.5 years later, and we're still doing it, James. In fact, 6.5 years later, and I'm having the same discussion with his nephew, who at that time was probably 12-year-old or something.
Well, I'd love to compare Celtic's current wage budget to the wage budget of Copenhagen, who just beat Manchester United last night. I'd love to compare those two wage budgets and then have the argument thrown at me that Celtic don't have the financial capabilities to compete. The only way it's going to be solid is if Celtic stumble domestically. And I think another reason is for that is there would be a really strong fan uproar, is because my generation, there's a generation of Celtic supporters that have grown up only seeing victories. They've only seen trebles, they've only seen titles every year. So when that doesn't happen, the uproar is going to be off the scale because that's all they know. That's all they know is winning trophies every year. There's always going to be a celebration at the end of the year. So if that doesn't happen, the fans are going to go berserk.
I'm going to ask you a question then, because obviously you're talking about generational perspectives, and what is that generation who have had nothing but success? And by the way, I don't deny that of anyone. You're born when you're born. Your point of reference is where it is. It's all by default, right? When I started going to the games, Celtic in the 1980s were a mixed bag, but Big Billy came back and it was a double winning fairy tale season in the centenary campaign. Then 9 years of drudgery. Yes, there was a Scottish Cup in '89, but Rangers won 9 league titles in a row. We won 2 Scottish Cups in that period, 89 and 95. So during that 80s and 90s period, the aspirations of Europe were pretty zilch, pretty zero. It was like, what did you expect? You heard stories from your dad and your granddads and your uncles and your cousins and all this kind of stuff about Celtic being a European force, but you'd never seen it. So if you look at the domination, let's go back to Martin O'Neill coming to Celtic in 2000, 2001. Up to now, we've dominated Scottish football. There's been wee sprinklings of league losses and all the rest of it, but we have dominated Scottish football in that period, James. I don't think anybody could argue when you look at the amount of trophies we've won. And in that period, a quadruple treble. an invincible treble. It's all there. But in that period, we've not been successful really in Europe. Yeah, we reached a European final 20 years ago against Porto in Seville, UEFA Cup. But other than that, there's been a good result here and there. A couple of good runs under Strachan, a good run under Neil Lennon, last 16s. So what is the perspective of that fan base who have known nothing but success, James? And as I say, I don't deny anybody that, because it's your default when you come into the game, when you come into Celtic. What is the perspective? What is the kind of ambition? What's the aspiration? Is there any expectancy to do something in Europe? Because I've never seen it, really. They've never really seen European success.
Well, I think most people in my generation, I don't mean to speak for a chunk of the support, but they would have been going into the game on Tuesday night expecting to get hammered. That is just the sad truth of it all. They would be going at that game expecting to be hammered. When you get a draw at home to Atletico, it's a complete surprise. It almost seems like a fluke. You mentioned some of the results that I would remember when I was really young. That would be the Strachan era, where Strachan got us out the groups. That's sort of my first real European memories. I can't really remember watching the games. The first games I really remember watching would be the win over Barcelona. Games like that, you can always sort of cling on to because we only know success. The only league titles I can remember Celtic losing in my time watching them, I think Walter Smith won 2 or 3 in a row around about the late 2000s, and then the season where Celtic lost to 10. That's the only titles I can remember Celtic losing.
It's like a glitch. That's just a glitch. Absolutely. Yeah.
There's people in my generation that would be expecting to go into these games domestically and win 4-5-0 every week, but then going to European games and expecting to get beat 4 or 5-0 off of these teams. There's a massive gap between the two. There's no real strong expectations for European games, which is sad because, as you mentioned, the European powerhouse that Celtic used to be.
Yeah, that's interesting though, because that 3 seasons, that was the transition from Strachan through Mowbray to Neil Lennon. And we didn't win the league over the 3 campaigns. Lennon wins it in 2012. Rangers go bust. We go on a run of 9 in a row. And as you know, we didn't win the 10th. And so, yeah, I get that. I totally get it. So there's an expectancy to win the league. But when it comes to Europe, I genuinely wanted to know what the kind of expectancy was. So that's really interesting. And it must be really dead interesting to go to all these games away from home knowing or expecting to get a bumping. I mean, by the way, fair play. It was the first point I brought up the other day. Fair play to every single fan that went to the game. AJSC Tech. Man, if I am a Celtic player, I am steaming mad for the Lazio game in Rome. We've had 2 soft reds, a last-minute goal and a cancelled winner. We need to use that anger against the Lazio. Listen, this is the way I'm kind of viewing it. I'm viewing it as a mini battle. The last 2 games, let's get something from both games. Let's improve on what our points tally was last season, and we can start building it again in January. And just going back to one of your points, James, about January not being a happy hunting ground, are you forgetting the January transfer window where we brought in Willow Flood? No. What I'm going to say is Ange Postecoglou's first January transfer window was brilliant. It was really, I mean, he brought in Idiguchi, and he also brought in Hatate, Maeda and Matt O'Reilly. And 3 out of 4 of them made a real impact. But we needed them to. It was one of the transfer windows to win the league. We really had to make a difference in that window, and we did. I'm not getting complacent, but I think that we can't really afford a disappointing January transfer window regardless. We really need to tie up, I think, at least 2 players who can make an impact in the team. And we might get a third if it's one of these situations, James, that presents himself like Matt O'Reilly, who might make an impact in the team, and you'll sign them as well. But I also want to see non-contributing players moved out of the club. I just don't like... By the way, I've got a lot of sympathy for them. I've got a lot of sympathy for the club. There's nowhere for them to play, James. You know, these half a dozen to 8 guys, 10 guys who just don't play week on week because they're not going to be playing B-team football in the Lowland League, and they're not in the Celtic squad. There's a purgatory. There's a middle ground at the moment, and there's too many players in it. So some of them, you've got to let them go full-time, permanent moves. Other ones, you need to get them loaned out. But I'm talking half a dozen, 8 players out in the summer, in the January transfer window as well.
I think that'd be really optimistic. I don't see us being really active in January. To be honest, I don't see us signing real first-team players. We have a 5-point gap at the moment. but I don't think that's enough of a gap for you to take risks and gambles in January. I think you've got to stick it through till the summer. But there has been windows where we have sprung some complete surprises, like getting Alistair Johnson last year and then getting Maeda and Hatate the year before. And I noticed you didn't mention the January window where we got Timo Weah, Oliver Burke and Jeremy Tolyan on loan. I remember there was a brief 2-week period after we got those players that there was a bit of hope that these guys could actually do something. Weah's actually I think it's Juventus now. He's at so his fortunes have turned out quite well. Funnily enough, he was the one that was on the bench and Oliver Burke was the one that was starting. Where is he now? I don't know.
TikTok. He's on TikTok.
Ollie
Burke. Every time his name comes up, I'm going to mention this until such times that he is not the most expensive Scottish footballer on the planet of all time when you accumulate transfer fees. Oliver Burke, born in Kirkcaldy. Where is he now? He's still at Werder Bremen, but he's loaned out, I believe.
Bremen, yeah. I think he's at Werder Bremen.
He must have some agent, I'll tell you. The most expensive Scottish footballer in the history of football, Oliver Burke. There you go. Prove me wrong. Plunge McNugget. Here we go. This board are never prepared for the Champions League. This is what I'm talking about with January, though, James. If you want to be prepared for the Champions League next season, you've got to do a bit of business in January, surely.
Yeah, who do they sign, though? What positions? I've outlined a couple of times in the podcast. I don't know whether, unless some incredible bargain presents himself to Celtic, or unless some absolute steal sort of presents itself from an agent offering a player out or something like that, I don't really see what Celtic do. We've not really seen much early rumours going about either, which I remember.
No, we haven't.
Last season, you had Kobayashi and probably Alistair Johnson linked with Celtic already, and you had Tomoki Iwata linked as well by this time. And even when we brought in Maeda, Hatate and Ideguchi, they were all linked about 2 or 3 months before we even signed them. I think we signed them on the 31st of December. We've not had any early real links coming along. But I've seen, you've been mentioning the game away to Lazio in Rome. What happens if Celtic win that game? We've been a bit doom and gloom for most of this show.
We have, for most of the week.
It's off the back of a 6-0 loss. You can't exactly be waxing lyrical.
You can't be a happy clapper after a game.
How much does the complexion of the group change if Celtic win in Lazio?
It completely flips.
Does it completely blow the group wide open? Because we're not going to get through, and we need a 9-point swing on the goal difference. We're not going to get out of the group. I've sort of resigned myself to that. But if we win in Lazio, anything can happen.
And you know, it would be a win that would be savoured. It definitely would be savoured. Now, Tam, by the way, talking about early indications or targets or any of this kind of stuff, I took the opportunity to speak to Pierre van Hooijdonk last Tuesday off record about Sydney, his lad, because I know that he had been linked to Celtic, lazy journalism, Jordan Larson, Sydney van Hooijdonk, you know, that kind of thing. He said that the player had never heard a peep from Celtic at any point in his career. So that was just paper talk, as we used to call it, or online rumour and gossip and all that kind of stuff. But that came directly from Pierre himself, who I think looks after his lad in terms of football and being his agent. Tam, Mac, there's talk of Kyogo being off the boil because Ange has his head turned. I'm not sure he's off the boil. That's why I'm bringing this one up. I don't think he's off the boil. He scored prior to Tuesday night. He'd scored in the previous 2 Champions League games. He's not off the boil. He's playing a different game.
He's scored in a derby. He's scored 2 Champions League goals. Which, if you were to go back to this summer, you're saying, what improvements do you want to see from player of the season, Kyogo Furuhashi? You would have said, adding it to European games. And what has he done? He's converted his domestic form to European games. So you can't knock Kyogo's season at all. There's nothing I could really criticise him for. There's probably been a bit more quiet games than there was last season. There's been a couple of games where he's been a bit starved of service, but I don't think you can really slate him for the season he's had so far. It would be nitpicking.
And even like if you were to pinpoint, you know, that 1-on-1 where he's dinked it over the Ross County goalie, you think he should score. He's always done that. I remember having a discussion 2 or 3 months into Kyogo's time at Celtic, and the discussion was, I tell you what, he misses a lot of chances as well as scoring a lot of goals. So I don't think it's changed. I think our style has changed. And we've been talking throughout the season saying that Brendan Rodgers might not have a 30-goal-a-season striker. You know, the same thing happened when he took over. I know that Dembele went on to score 32, but remember Griffiths was scoring 40 goals a season. And that all changed. There was a bigger spread of goals throughout the team. Ian O'Sullivan, welcome to the show now. Ian has booked his first Acsom show last night. I'm going to take a few moments to talk about our plans. Flying in from Cork to attend Martin O'Neill's show in Greenock in January. Looking forward to meeting you all for the first time. Hail, hail, Acsom. Right, Ian, brilliant. Really looking forward to seeing you, and hopefully we can get a wee chat on the night as well. So here's the deal. Throughout 2023, it was my intention to get back out there after having, been locked up, not in jail, by the way, locked up through the pandemic for that length of time, although it does look like a jail cell in here. I'm getting told. Yes, yes, it's a work in progress. I might just stick some things up until we get the actual feature all done. But anyway, so during 2023, we have done an average of 1 gig a month, and they've all sold out. I think except one, it's like 99% tickets sold. So we know it's going well, it's great, but we're always looking to improve. So what we're doing in 2024, starting with Martin O'Neill, is we're going to bigger venues. That's the first thing we're going to do because, tickets are selling out. So you think, let's keep the tickets as cheap as possible and take them to bigger venues. So we're doing that at the Greenock Beacon Arts Theatre, which is a stunning venue. And there's loads of Celtic fans in that area and others who are going to travel, like Ian, coming in from Cork. You're going to come into the arena. It's going to be a completely different kind of atmosphere in that respect. If you want to do the VIP thing, you can come along and meet Martin O'Neill, get your photograph taken, get signed items and all that stuff. But we are going to use content on the stage as well. So there's going to be video content, which is going to be relevant to what we're going to be talking about. We're going to have Paul Sheridan from the Wakes entertaining you with live music. Paul obviously was hugely involved in our charity single, The Glory and the Dream, that was released last December, and for a spell kept Mariah Carey below us in the charts, believe it or not, who I think is the Queen of Christmas or something like that, but we were above her in the charts on a couple of occasions. So the gig itself is going to be completely different. Venue's going to be bigger, probably more suited to a night like this. We're going to have bigger guests, Martin O'Neill being one of them. Can't reveal who else is going to be flying in for these big events. And we're going to try and keep it as cheap and affordable as possible. So yeah, it might cost £20 to come along and see Johan Mialbi at the end of next month in a pub environment, which obviously is Don Max in Glasgow, but we're going to keep the pricing as low as possible. So to come and see Martin O'Neill, it's still going to cost £20 in a brilliant venue, an unbelievable venue with added entertainment, as I was saying before, Paul Sheridan of the Wakes with the live music and video content to give you the visual aid as well. Really looking forward to it. Cannot wait. Martin O'Neill is funny. He's insightful. He's a character. He really is. I had a great time with him the other week. So looking forward to that. Keep your eyes peeled for future events. Martin O'Neill will sell out. Now, it's a 500 capacity venue. It will sell out. We sold 350 tickets in something like 40 hours the last time that we did a gig in Glasgow with them. And overnight, we have sold huge numbers for this gig. So if you want to come along, great Christmas present as well. Links underneath the video. Thank you, everybody. I'm pretty sure tomorrow we will be focusing on the weekend. Not forgetting what's happened during the week, but we'll be focusing on the weekend. Thank you, everybody, for getting involved. And thank you, James Mackenzie, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.